With me now is Jennifer Frame campaigner for End Our Cladding Scandal. Jennifer, good of you to come down and speak to us. I was reflecting with our correspondent Rachel Venables a short time ago about the next chapter of this, and it is a long one for those affected by the Grenfell Tower fire. 7 years ago, cladding was brought into the public domain. We knew about this combustible cladding because of what happened, and we found out it was prevalent in high-rise buildings across the UK. It was seen as life-critical to remove and replace that cladding. 7 years on, we've only scratched the surface in terms of dealing with the problem that's out there.
Absolutely. So I think, there was originally a timeline stated by the ministers in the former government that all cladding would be removed within 5 years of the Grenfell Tower disaster. We're now 7 years on, and we're only a small proportion through that. So our campaign team deals with residents and leaseholders across the whole country who are still stuck in this nightmare. The official figures state that there are 4,500 buildings being monitored. But in fact, last month, MHCLG put out estimates that there are 11,000 buildings above 11 metres that are affected. If that's the case, then we're only about 12% through this. So although it's been a long wait for justice for the bereaved and survivors and residents, and it's been an incredibly difficult 7 years from them, and it could be 10 years until they have charges or begin to go to trial. But actually, at that point, there will still be so many people living in buildings with exactly the same life-critical fire safety defects, unable to move on with their lives.
And why is it taking so long?
Well, there's been some small improvements over the recent years. So Michael Gove did pass the Building Safety Bill. There was funding made available, but only a quarter of the government funding has been spent so far. So it's still taking far too long for that funding to get to the ground. There's still a delay as well with freeholders even agreeing for works to be done on their buildings, so signing agreements. And one of the things Keir Starmer said in his statement today was he addressed that and said that they will look to potentially have legal consequences for delays on building owners signing permissions to do work on their buildings, and look at ways to force that through more quickly. So there's a number of reasons, but we're still really at the stage where every single actor is still fighting over liability rather than putting the safety of people first. And I think today we just really need to remember that this is a human issue. There's huge personal consequences if we don't treat safety seriously.
Yeah, as the report said, there is this system of passing the buck, passing on the blame, finger-pointing when people have the right to live in safe housing. And you hear the Prime Minister there of this new government saying, this is it, this should never happen again. But the reality of the situation, it's not just the families of Grenfell Tower affected, it's families living across the UK having sleepless nights thinking, we're in a tinderbox here. What's that like?
Absolutely. Well, personally, my home burnt down in a fire 5 years ago. Our building burnt down 2 years after Grenfell. And so that feeling that if the government had taken a grip of the issue more quickly, taken it seriously, at that stage we were just talking about a subset of the problem, which was ACM cladding, high-rise buildings, possibly only social housing. And I think still trying to sort of deny the full range of the problems. And I think the report today said that governments have been complacent, actually, that word was used, in actually knowing the facts and failing to act on it really in terms of putting safety first. And I think the difficulty is people not knowing when the end point of that is going to be. It seems to be stretching on forever. And in his response today, Rishi Sunak, for example, said that the Conservatives would act collegiately and help if there needed to be any extra legislation passed. But he used the phrase protecting leaseholders from proportionate costs, excessive costs. And the question should be, why should residents and leaseholders be picking up any costs at all? The report today made it pretty clear that there's a whole gamut of bodies who are responsible for this crisis in a systemic way, and it's certainly not the leaseholders and residents.
Yeah, it should be them picking up the bill to put it right. Jennifer, some of the images we were showing on the screen there of the tower, that should be the motivation to get this moving quickly, to get this problem resolved. It doesn't seem to have been. And what many families and survivors have said to me over recent days is what will really move this along and make change come about quicker is criminal prosecutions. People in handcuffs, people going to court, people going to prison. Fines, recommendations, strong words just won't cut it.
Well, we certainly, approve of the strong words today in the report. But yes, exactly, it's actions that need to happen. So we need to make sure that those are tracked and monitored, those recommendations, and ensure that they actually happen, because the recommendations of the Grenfell Inquiry were ignored, and that led to, Grenfell happening. So It's good to have learnings, but we need to move on because, you know, the families and the bereaved asked for truth, justice, change and charges. We're at truth now, we have truth, but we need to make sure there are changes, and not just in relation to future buildings, but correcting all the mistakes of the past and admitting all the mistakes of the past. And, you know, it's been laid bare today, so let's just act to make those buildings safe as soon as possible.
Yeah, Jennifer, what would your advice be to anyone that's affected by this? Because, you know, it's not problems singular to North Kensington to London. This is UK-wide.
Absolutely.
These thousands of buildings, they're unsafe for people to go to sleep in tonight.
So please don't feel afraid to share your story. We've got a debate coming up on the floor of the House in October, so we know that every constituency MP will be able to put a position across there. So make sure your story's heard and make sure this is seen as a national systemic issue. There were uniquely devastating consequences for Grenfell, but it was a systemic issue that's affected thousands of homes, hundreds of thousands of homes. So we need to sort of make sure that we see that these issues are just as important for the people that are still living with the consequences in homes today.
OK, Jennifer, really good to talk to you, Jennifer Frame there. Thank you for your time this afternoon. Thank you.